John, thank you for being here.
So excited to be here and am so ready to serve your audience. Let's do this.
Let's do it. So, the astronauts you've talked to used the same word to describe our planet, which was fragile. So, what effect did this understanding have on you, and how differently did you look at our civilization afterwards?
Yeah, it is very interesting. That exact quote came from my friend and long-term mentor, Captain Wendy Lawrence, who felt that when she was on the space shuttle. But I've heard something similar come from all the astronauts I've spoken to. And that has something to do with something that's been coined the overview effect, where you kind of see yourself projected above the earth, and it gives you this perspective of how, one, minuscule we are in the big scheme of things, but two, you see the entire systems that are playing out on earth below you, and you start to see how interconnected they are and how vital they are in supporting each other, so that we, as well as all other inhabitants, are part of this and are nourishing this ecosystem. So I think that's what they really mean by it. And I remember Chris Cassidy, another astronaut friend of mine, was telling me that one day he's in the cupola as they're flying over New York City. And he was just putting himself in the perspective of what he thought was going on down there in rush hour traffic, with people being late for meetings, upset about the traffic, probably swearing, flicking people off, whatever it have you. And he just thought about that and how he himself has felt that, but how it doesn't mean a thing in the big scheme of things. And yet we get so caught up in those things instead of just realizing the importance of the greater good that we're supposed to be doing, and not getting caught up in those moments like that, that tend to just stress us out and create more havoc than they do good in our life.
And I think that's a great jumping off point to talk about why you wrote your book, Passion Struck.
Given we're talking to a Gen Z and probably millennial audience, the reason I wrote this, and I dedicated it to my two children, who at the time when I wrote it were 18 and 24 at the time. They're now older, but I just see this next generation coming up into a world where so much is being thrown upon them. Many of this they're inheriting, similar to the way I inherited things from my predecessors, but the world they're coming into has a lot of difficulties right now, much more than mine did when I was their same ages. And I wanted to put some guidance out there from my own life and for my kids, of steps that anyone who's listening to this or reads the book could start taking to create the life that they dream of having. Because I think your generation is going to be forced with having to deal with change, probably on the most rapid level that anyone in history has had to deal with. And so it means you're going to have to adapt at a quicker pace than I did, which I thought I had to adapt at a quick pace. So the book really lays out that the key to having a successful life, is really the constant pursuit of knowledge and learning and applying that. But throughout it, I wanted to give life principles to the readers from a list of 750 luminaries who I've studied over the past 7 to 8 years. And when I boiled it all down into, not only why are these people successful in their business, but more importantly, why are they successful in life, I kept finding these 12 principles come up again and again. And the beauty of this book is that I ended up rebuilding my life, and I did it off of me search of using these principles in my life, understanding that they do work. And so I wanted to share this knowledge with the next generations.
That's an incredibly noble pursuit. And, we are going through a massive shift in terms of the frequency of the necessity to adapt and to change. Um, it's different for every individual, and it's frankly different for every generation. So for you, you pursued the FBI, you pursued an FBI path after military service. What was this like? What were the passions behind it? And what did you learn from this experience?
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing that up. I actually coming through this phase in the military and figuring out what I was going to do in the next step, I was on a counter drug task force down in Key West, Florida, and we happened to have representatives of all the major agencies there. And all of them approached me and said, you need to apply. So it wasn't as if I was just going through the FBI recruiting process. In parallel, I was going through customs, DEA, CIA, NSA, and
Wow.
FBI all at the same time. And so through that, I got polygraphed by each one of them, lie detected tests through each one of us, interviewed by each one of them. And obviously, the most grueling one out of all of them is the CIA entry program. But the FBI was pretty close in lockstep to it. And I just found that the mission that they were signing me up to do, which was going to be part utilizing the NSA background that I had, but also the counter drug interdiction background that I had, was going to create the most meaningful path for me. And so I went into this running. I was so excited about the opportunity to join the FBI. It was kind of the things that I dreamed about when I was a kid, of getting to knock down doors and be in constant action, and uh, be in an environment where my work and everything about it, I just felt a passion for. And so I was so psyched to go do this. And life throws you curveballs, and it happens to all of us. And that's exactly what happened to me. This was during the Clinton administration. It was the first time that I know of that Congress couldn't get their act together to do a balanced budget. And so, given their tumultuous period, a lot of the government agencies at that point had to shut down or cancel their initiatives. And that's exactly what happened to me. And so I expected this to be a short term thing. Maybe I'd be recycled 6 weeks from now, 2 months from now. But the detailer made it very clear that I was looking at 18 months, best case, most likely 36 months to 48, which is what it ended up becoming. And so by the time it emerged, I had already taken the plan B, and this opportunity kind of passed me up.
And when did you realize that your life was kind of like a pinball in a pinball machine? Was it this moment or was it further down the line? And how did you realize that?
It was much further down the line. I think we get in these situations where we're either following in the footsteps of our parents or grandparents, or what we think are the jobs that we should pursue. I ended up starting down the path of management consulting. I worked for Booz Allen. I then worked for Arthur Andersen. And when Arthur Andersen imploded, I think I had a real pivotal choice I could have made there, where I could have gone back into the pursuit of something that lit me up inside. However, at this time, I had one child, we had another child on the way, and it wasn't really a career pivot point where I had the opportunity to have a lot of cash flow from other sources, etc. And so I ended up pursuing a career in large business and went down the path of being a business executive. And I think the more I got into that path, I became very good at it. I excelled at it just as I had a consultant. I have always been that type that whatever I put my mind to, I want to be the best I possibly can be. But I guess growing up, I never in a million years thought I was going to be sitting behind a desk doing IT projects and IT initiatives on behalf of corporations. And so the further I got into this, the more I just started to feel disconnected from myself. And it was one of those situations that I think a lot of people hear about, where I had outer order. It seemed like on the outside that my life was going brilliantly. If anyone had looked at my resume, what they would have seen is practice leader in a big four consulting firm by the time 28, C level in a Fortune 500 company by the time I was 31, CIO of a Fortune 50 company by the time I'm 39. So I'm just skyrocketing up the rocket ship of advancement. And I just came to this place where, although it seemed I had all the success that I had always dreamed of and all the material things I had always wanted, more cars than I knew what to do with, more toys, clothing, all those things. Inside, I was in inner turmoil. And that's when I really started to do some self awareness and some inner work, and started to hear this inner voice that was telling me that the path that I'm on is self destructive and is only going to lead to more misery and pain. And I needed to do something different. But I have to tell you, it came at a time that was extremely difficult to even ponder making that decision, because when you've got this cash flow coming in, the house that you've built up, you now have all these obligations that are kind of holding you in place, plus what the people around you now see, because you're now kind of immersed in that collective group of people who are kind of in the same place that you are. And so I found it very difficult, even when I knew I wasn't on the right path, to bridge that gap and make that first move to do something different.
Yeah, it seems like people only associate success as like this ladder that you slowly but surely climb up. And not a lot of people think that success is really a prison. And it seems like you realized that very, you know, not early on, but you eventually realized that if you wanted to pivot, if you wanted to do something different, realize your internal success, because that was faltering. It was just external things that were, making you happy, external pleasures. Um, Yes, I do agree that Gen Z are in that position very early on in life where they've kind of realized that this entire system that they're, you know, somewhat nurturing, somewhat being nurtured by does not work for them. Like these predisposed goals of go to school, get a job, have children, retire at 65, like at every point, it just doesn't it doesn't compute. They can't really go to school because maybe they don't have the grades, they don't have the attention span. If they go to school, they'll be drowned in debt. They can't really get a job because they don't have the skill sets or they haven't done post-secondary education. They don't really want to have kids because, again, their economic status, the state of the world, et cetera, et cetera. This is not a doom and gloom conversation. But one thing I want to really drive home is that you're not coming from the vantage point of, hey, Gen Z, I know better than you. This is what you should do. You're coming from the vantage point of, hey, I made these mistakes very early on in life, and I've learned these many things. And so here is a kind of framework or toolkit for all of you young people to use and hopefully do better than me. And so from that, I would ask, how do we unlock the power of doing something different?
So I wanted to just touch on something you said, and then I'll go into that. I mean, you're absolutely right. I am not someone of your generation, so I can't pretend that I know exactly what you're going through. But what I'm seeing, and I guess my maturity has allowed me to see, is the change that's coming and the magnitude of the change. And I just look at the research that's coming out of MIT, Oxford, some other major universities, who are predicting that half the jobs that exist today will be automated in the next 20 years. Google's top rated futurist, Thomas Frey, predicts that 2 billion jobs will be automated by 2030 himself. So those are just two litmus test points. But on top of that, you look at the work that's coming out of Gallup right now that is showing, out of the 1.2, 1.3 full-time workers across the world, 99, I think the number is 900 million of them feel unfulfilled by what they do. So I look at this, and you've got almost 9/10 of the full-time workers loathe what they do. You've got this impending change that's coming that seems unavoidable. And I know that a lot of these Gen Zs are feeling very apprehensive about the future and what do I do? And I felt the same way about many different things when I was your exact age. I thought there was no way I could ever live the American dream. There was no way I was ever going to have the same standard of living as my parents. There was no way I was going to be able to afford a house like they did. I had many of these same worries. It's just the playground is completely different around us. So, on this concept of how do you find this path to what you were born to do, I like using the analogy of being a mission angler. And I just use this angler metaphor because I live here in Tampa Bay, Florida. We have probably some of the most gorgeous fishing grounds around us in the Gulf of Mexico. And this past weekend, I happened to go boating, and we saw a whole bunch of these fishermen coming back from what looked like tournaments. And when I know that anglers were very good at their trade, they go out very early in the morning, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. They're very deliberate about looking at the tides. They're looking at the moon phases. They're very particular about knowing what bait they need to get, where they need to be, where they've heard things are biting, etc. They're very, very intentional about how they're going about becoming the best fishermen they can or putting themselves in the best position to do so. However, we in our own lives, the vast majority of us don't use that same discipline in how we're angling for the things that we want and crafting the life that we want. And so to me, if you want to figure out what you're passionate about, it's not this thing, this magical out of the sky, drop in your lap thing that's going to happen overnight. That's just not how it works. It's something you're going to have to do the work for. And I think it's important for people to realize that you have to start taking the actions and putting yourself in a place where you're exposing yourself to enough activities to give yourself a sense of what do you enjoy doing? What are you good at? What fulfills you? And then having the introspection to sit with yourself and examine your life and where you want to go, and to start using those talents as the foundation for cultivating the paths that are going to get you to where you want to be in life. Meaning, once you start knowing what your core skill sets are, it's almost like going back to high school when you're meeting with your guidance counselor and I think doing a whole categorization of the things that you have strengths in, where you have weaknesses, where you have strong passions to help other people, and then start backtracking into what are the job opportunities that are out there that you can pursue that will make those things a reality. And I love to tell this story of a friend of mine who now founded the business school at the American Catholic University in Washington, D.C. And Andreas Widmer is his name. And he was absolutely listless, had no idea what he wanted to do when he was in his late teens, 18, 19 years old. And he grew up in Switzerland, and his parents encouraged him to apply to the Swiss Guard because he was going down the wrong rabbit hole. Never thought he was going to get the opportunity, ends up getting selected. Before he knows it, not only is he a Swiss Guard, but he's guarding Pope John Paul II. And he tells me the story of the Pope with all his duties, everything he's got going on around the world. When you're around him, makes it feel to you as the person in his presence that everything else melts away, and the only thing is you and him, and just this incredible connection. And he knew that Andreas was lost, and so he started mentoring him, and he really hunkered down on the message to Andreas that the reason we're all put here, whether you're a spiritual believer or not, we were all put here with specific attributes and capabilities and talents that are inherently unique to each and every one of us. And it's our job to understand how we best utilize our strengths for the benefit of humanity, going back to the world is fragile. And so that is what I would encourage anyone who's listening to this to do, is to make that your lifelong journey and figuring out how you can exploit the things that you do best to serve other people. And I guarantee you, if you do that, you are going to feel so fulfilled by whatever it is and whatever path that you take, that the money and everything else aren't going to matter to you because you feel so fulfilled by what you do.
Yeah, can we just touch on that point just for a second? So, not a lot of people, unfortunately, have experienced this kind of, let's call it excess in life of having all the money and like external pleasures that they want. Everybody dreams of it, but not many people have experienced that. So, you said you experienced that around age 39 when you were CIO, and it was incredibly empty. The feeling was just meh, because you had all of these things around you, but you didn't feel internally as successful, as full. What was that like? Like, can you just take us through precisely what you were feeling and what you were not feeling, how your mind was kind of warped around, the kinds of questions that you were constantly being plagued with of what the hell is going on? This is like on paper the definition of success, and yet I don't feel it. So what was that like?
It's important for people to understand what that success comes with. And the baggage that comes with it when you're operating at that level is, in my case, the corporation I was working for owned me. And the crazy thing about seniority is the more senior you get, the higher your salary is, which makes you actually more disposable if you're not creating results than almost anyone else in a corporation. Or think about you're an elite athlete and they're paying you a $700 million contract, like this Japanese athlete. The expectations become all that much higher. And that baseball team absolutely owns him, just as Dell owned me. And so the backside that people don't see is that when you're in these positions, I was getting further and further away from the things that I absolutely loved doing, because the vast majority of my job was dealing with politics from the layer of executives above me to my peer groups, and trying to manage all of that was probably 50% of my job. Another 25 to 30% of my job was dealing with the HR issues that come with leading a 1.3, $1.4 billion organization and having people in 5 different continents and 15 different countries. And so the people issues of the day were just absorbing. And so you just get into this rut where you're kind of going through the motions of going into work, dreading it, because all you're doing is going from one meeting or chaotic situation to the next that you have to solve for. And it takes a toll, not only from that stress that you're feeling and the pressure that's on you to perform, but the other things where I was working most weeks. A light week was 80 hours a week. Normal weeks could be 100-hour weeks. And I was traveling because so much of my staff was overseas. 2 weeks out of the month were on airplanes. So I was traveling close to 250,000 to 350,000 miles a year. And you think that this is a novelty. Boy, you get to travel. But after you've done it a few times, and at this point, I'd already been doing it for well over a decade, it just is a job. And so you're away from your family, you're eating unhealthily, your system is constantly going through time zone changes. And so you're in this constant cycle of being out of cycle. But the biggest thing that I would want people to understand is, at the end of the day, what I came to the realization of is I had become extremely adept at making other people money and other people's dreams come true. Yet I found myself in this profound position where I wasn't making my own dreams come true. And so what I was feeling, and it happens over a period of time to get there, is I was absolutely burned out. But what scared me the most is I had reached a point where I was just emotionally numb. And it's a state I wouldn't desire for anyone to have, because it's as if nothing starts mattering to you. And that's how I felt. There was just nothing of significance. And when that starts to occur, it starts infiltrating all areas of your life. And so I think it's extremely important to look at the people who exist in the blue zones across the world and how they have lived, and also go back to studies like the adults Harvard study of adult aging, which has been going on for 80 plus years. And if you examine both of these, it really comes down to what makes human beings flourish. And in neither research does any of that have anything to do with monetary success. It has to do with the relationships that you form. It has to do with the competencies that you build in life, meaning the expertise that you learn, the competencies that you're striving for, autonomy, meaning self agency, that you have the power of choice to guide the life that you want in the way that you want to live it. And then you have to really put effort into your physical health, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, if that's important to you, and financial health, which I think is extremely important as well. Because even though you shouldn't be guided for the love of money, you do need to have some financial wherewithal to have any semblance of a comfortable life that you want to lead. So I found a huge gap because I had absolutely found myself living my ought life, the life I felt I should be living, but I was light years away from living my ideal self.
And when you realized that this was the kind of subpar life and there was another land of life, if you will, to get to, how difficult was it to kind of reorient yourself? Was it something that, you realized at 39, but you only started enacting maybe at 45 to give an arbitrary number? Was it something that you realized and then overnight you were just like, you know what? I'm done with this life. I'm going to take as many steps as possible to get to the life that I really do want. Was it something that you kind of procrastinated with, something where you were passionate about it for 5 months, then you hit a roadblock, you went back to your old life, then you kind of like rejuvenated your passion, and then you recalibrated? Like what was it like? What was that journey like?
Yeah, it definitely didn't happen overnight. And I think that's the fallacy that we think in our heads. But what we don't realize is we didn't get to where we are overnight either. I mean, you don't become burned out overnight. It typically takes years to feel burned out. So, in order to reverse this and get on a different track, it's going to take time and a bunch of tiny actions that build up over time to get you to this next destination. I think the most difficult thing, regardless of your age, and I'll just give an example. I recently interviewed another podcaster, Mimi Bouchard, who I think is 27, 28. As she was growing up as a teen, she was going down the wrong path, similar to Andreas. She had started drinking and doing drugs at 12. Her life was spiraling out of control. She was lucky enough that she realized it when she was 17 or 18 and started to immerse herself into self improvement books, meditation, introspection, and completely turned her life around. And I mention that only because she's in the same age bracket. I think the harder thing is when you wait in life as long as I waited, because the buildup of that foundation that you then have to break down is just more robust because you've been living it longer. So for me, it was really hard to even see, how do I get out of where I'm at? How do I even think about taking that first step? Because the mission that I was hearing from this inner voice was that I was being called to serve the beaten, bored, broken, lonely, helpless, battered of the world. And so I'm sitting here as an IT executive, father, doing what I'm doing. Like, what does that even mean? How am I supposed to help those people? How do I even find that next step onto what is the first action that I would take? All those things. And so I think I did what most people do, is I just kept pushing it off, thinking that this is going to go away. And I have to tell you, when you start hearing that voice and you're not listening to it, the universe or God or however you want to look at it, I think starts making that voice louder and more apparent in various different ways. And that's what started happening to me. And yet, even as it was getting louder, I still pushed forward in my career, thinking, if I do a slight switch and I go from a Fortune 50 company to a $1 billion company, and I take this burden off that I thought I was feeling there, and I do something different, that this stuff is just going to magically start repairing itself. And what I have come to realize is it doesn't matter what size company you're in, whether you're in a doctor's office, a $1 billion company, a startup, they pretty much all have the same issues. It's just a different order of magnitude. And it eventually just took me having some life events that caused me to reach a point where I felt like I was at rock bottom, where I had the great opportunity that once you reach there, the greatest thing about it is you can rebuild your life brick by brick. But the hardest thing for me to do was myself to go through what I was talking about earlier with the mission angler and life crafting, to understand what were the things I really enjoyed doing the most, and how could I utilize my talents to serve this group of people that I was being called to serve that I didn't know how to serve. And so the most fundamental exercise I went through was something called the one word problem, which is, if you're looking at this group of people that you're being called to help, what is the underlying issue that you are trying to solve on their behalf? Because I'm not going to create a marketing program and a PR campaign that says, hey, I am coming to help the beaten, broken, bored, and battered of the world. I mean, who's going to buy that? No one. So I went through so many different permutations of this. It probably took me a year of just painstakingly going through this and thinking I'd come to the one word, when I came to the conclusion I hadn't. And ultimately, what I discovered was what I am being called to solve is this chronic epidemic of unmattering, where so many people feel a lack of significance in their life, um, and this profound longing to feel like they matter. And it feels like apathy or indifference. It feels like um, you you're going through the motions, and that none of it makes a damn difference. So how do you break free from that? And so that's ultimately what Passion Struck is all about. And I found that the opposite of living that way is to live intentionally.
Speaking specifically about the book, kind of like a meta question, but what was your writing style like? Did you have any specific writing practices? Do you have any kind of meditative routines to help you think about writing? I always like asking authors, what their best practices are.
Yeah, for me, I like to have a set period of time when I write during the day. I am most alert early in the morning, so I would carve out a period of time that after I did my morning routine, the first thing I would do is sit sit down and start writing, and I would carve out a block of time where I turn my phone off, I turn off all email and everything, and for those next 2 to 3 hours, all I do is try to get into um, the optimal zone of anxiety and push forward and write as much as I possibly can. And the way I try to get myself into that position for what I'm going to write is I do an early morning walk with my dog,
Mm.
and I probably go 3 miles, and about a mile and a half of it, I just spend that time in meditation, thinking about um, how I want to approach my day, or if I'm writing, how I want to approach the next thing I'm working on. And I'm the type where I like to free flow a lot of ideas onto paper, but I also do a ton of research. So I kind of combine free flow with research that I'm that I've done. But the most important thing is to get things on paper, because I find that once I do, I'm the type who's going to edit it 3 or 4 or 5 times um, to perfect it to a point where I think it's polished enough to make up a chapter. So
Do you
that's kind
have
of how I approach it.
do you have any broader productivity hacks for Gen Z who maybe, some of the people are in post-secondary, they're in startups, they could be, trying to learn a new skill, and unfortunately, they are more susceptible to distraction. We could go on a tangent with that, but I'll just stay focused. Do you have any specific, like, do you use caffeine? You said you turn your phone off. You spend hours in the morning in like a meditative trance of thinking about things, wandering, which is something that Jeff Bezos really likes doing. You are a very successful person, so obviously certain things that you did, certain practices, whether you were aware about them or not, factored into you getting to the top spots. So, like, what were those productivity hacks or routines other than what you've already discussed?
So first off, I would say you have to figure out if you're a night person or a morning person. And just because you don't think you're a morning person doesn't mean you can't train yourself to become a morning person. I had never thought of myself as a morning person, yet I wake up every day at 5 a.m. The most important thing is you have to find a period in the day. For me, it's much easier to front load it than it is to put it at the end of the day, because I find too many things that get in the way of me doing it. So I like to do my routine of things that are focused selfishly on myself, because I am firmly of the belief that you first have to lead yourself, then you can lead others, then you can lead a culture or a community or something else. So I spend this time doing the things that are for myself to be better. So this, for me, incorporates meditation, walking, reading, journaling, and working out in the first 2 hours of the day. And then from that, I front load the most important activities that I need to get done in the first 3 to 4 hours of my workday. So that means I put off emails, I put off non important things into the afternoon, when, at least for me, my mind isn't as operating at the same level of proficiency as it is in the morning. So the morning is when I try to do my creative endeavors. Even if I'm interviewing someone on the podcast, or I want to be on a podcast, I like doing it in the morning because I'm the most alert. And then I back end the day on the less important tasks that I need to get done, answering phone calls, doing things like that. But whatever it is for an individual, I think you need to orient your day around those time periods where you are most effective and able to operate at your highest peak. I know many writers, they love to write in the wee hours in the morning. For me, that just doesn't work. And so much more a go to bed early, read before I go to bed, get a solid sleep, wake up and hit it. Now, I do use nootropics, which are, I think, a newer age thing. Although many of the nootropics that are out there, such as caffeine and nicotine, have been around there for a long time. But I have found some that specifically work for me because they really ignite cognition. And the one I use is a mixture of caffeine, a slight bit of nicotine, and methylene blue, all combined in. And I take it as a troche, which is something that you put in your gum and you suck on. But there are many different types that are out there. I experimented with a product called Magic Mind, which is a liquid that you shoot, and that one had some great results as well.
So you're reading at night, meditating in the morning, deep work is reserved for the morning, shallow work for the afternoon. Yeah, that sounds very, structured. And were you always like this, or did it take a lot of trial and error to get there?
No, it took trial and error because as life throws events at you, like having kids, it throws off your complete schedule. And I think the biggest complaint I hear people say is, I don't have time to do these things. Well, that's where I get back to, you're going to have to find the time. And it might not be the convenient time, ideally, that you want it to be. But if you have kids like I had kids, the one time that I knew they weren't awake was 5 to 6:30 in the morning. So that became that quiet period of time that I knew I was going to have.
Right.
Whereas when I got home from work, you want to spend time with your family. And if you're anything like I was, I was so burnt out from the stress of the day that it was very difficult for me at 10 or 11 o'clock to have the mind capability that I was going to do some of these passion projects that I wanted to get done. I think that is something that's important for people to realize. I think the other thing, I was having a conversation with Jim Quick. If people don't know who Jim is, he's got a great book called Limitless. And Jim and I were having this conversation. And we both agree that reading is one of the most important things that you can possibly do. And if you look at the most successful people, they're all huge readers. I read about 100 books a year. And I've taught myself how to speed read. If you read Jim's book, he'll teach you too. But we were having this conversation. What is the only difference between someone who's illiterate and someone who can read? The fact that they actually read books. And it's amazing to me how many people I go to and I ask them, what book are you reading? And they're like, I hate books, or I haven't read a book in so long. And even if you do an audio book, being a constant learner of a myriad of different topics is the best way that you're going to stay ahead of your peer group and excel, because you're going to immerse yourself into so many different ideas and capabilities that you will leverage almost subconsciously just by immersing yourself in them. So it doesn't matter if it's 15 minutes a day or an hour, just get in the regular habit of doing some type of reading exercise throughout the day. It could even be what you use to fill up your white space during the days, to have some creative outlets while you're in between meetings or on a break or whatever it might be.
Yeah, so many things to say. Number one is that I think Tim Ferriss said that, he doesn't understand why people say they don't have time for things. He associates people not having time with being disorganized. I've also never understood how people don't have time, because if your life is organized, then you know exactly how much time you have. And then second is that, to your point, I think Tim Urban was the one that said, if you can read for half an hour, either twice a day or once a day, for 50 years, you can read 1,000 books in your lifetime. I believe that was what he said. So yes, I'm a big reader as well. Reading is incredibly important. And just one more thing on this kind of productivity tangent. The opposite side to productivity is relaxation. And it's a very important thing, allowing your mind to not shut off, but not be super engaged in work, allowing it to wander, allowing yourself to just, stare at whatever, the television, the computer, and not focus so much. It's frankly very healthy. So what are your relaxation practices? You said you meditate, you probably spend time with your kids, spend time with your dog. The reason I'm asking this is because productivity is important for career success. Relaxation is important for internal success, and that's something that we want to cultivate as well. with your passion?
Relaxation comes in the form of walking, comes in the form of listening to music, comes in the form of playing drums.
Hmm,
I'm just at the start of trying to teach myself again how to play guitar. Uh,
nice.
and on the thing that you just brought up, I think it's extremely important for people to realize, and this is something I learned from Tim Ferriss as well, or it might have been Adam Grant. But if you just spend 15 minutes a day doing something that you want to learn, let's say it's me trying to learn guitar, at the end of the year, if I do that 15 minutes a day on average, I will be better at guitar than 97% of the rest of the people on earth
Hmm.
because you're just putting that much intentional focus on it. So anything that you want to improve, if you just spend 15 minutes a day on it and you keep doing it over time, you're eventually going to become world class at it. And when you think about it, 15 minutes isn't that long. It's the consistency where it matters. Other things I do to relax, which some people might not find relaxing, is I go to improv classes and I do Toastmasters.
Whoa. Say more about that.
I think for people at any age, and I wish I would have done this at a younger age, and so I've pushed my son to get into it. I think improv is one of the best things that you possibly can do. One, it's a heck of a lot of fun. I mean, at first, you might not feel like it's fun because you're being put into situations where you're pressured to have to react on the fly. But what improv is really about is having adult fun. So typically, when you go to a class, you're doing games before you're doing the improv class, which are helping you to relate to people in a better way. Typically, they're getting you to pay attention to other people by doing these crazy, wacky things that you're doing. But ultimately, you're having fun because you're putting yourself into an uncomfortable position. And if you allow yourself to just do it, it becomes really a fun and relaxing and highly laughable pastime. And I love improv itself because it teaches you so many life skills. The most important is all of us are going to be put in positions professionally and personally where you're on the spot, and learning how to deal with that effectively and not negatively is an extremely important life skill to learn. And Toastmasters is something I highly encourage everyone to do, because if you have any desire to articulate your positions professionally or personally, knowing how to speak and how to get points across in a compelling way is extremely important. So that's why I do both of them and highly encourage, especially Gen Zs, to pick these things up as well.
I just made a note. That's why I was typing. I'm definitely going to do that in the next week or so. That sounds very fun. Okay, let's wrap up that little segment and get back to Passion Struck. What is the most natural kind of thing to talk about at this very moment? Is it the bee and turtle effect or the pain in the ass mosquito? Which one should we talk about first, which leads naturally to the other?
We've been talking about Tim Ferriss and some of the productivity hacks, probably the bee and turtle effect,
Okay, let's do that
because
one.
going back to this aspect that Tim Ferriss says that he doesn't understand why people say they don't have time. I profiled Elon Musk in this chapter, but I could have easily have profiled Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. All of these people break their days down into micro periods of time. In the case of Gates and Musk, they break their days down into 5-minute intervals. And that's where they draw their success, whether it's a meeting or a task that they're working on. They break them up into 5 minutes before switching to the next thing. But the bee and turtle effect is really just a life philosophy, because what I have found over the course of my life is that to be intentional and to become passion struck is learning how to live your life in a state of alignment where actions, aspirations, and ambitions are in perfect harmony, challenging one's inner fire towards meaningful or impactful endeavors. And in order to do that, you need to have a practical strategy that allows you to do it. So the bee and turtle effect really lays it out like this. Bees are very much about the given seconds, the given moments of the day. Their life is all about doing the work that they need to do in the now to support the queen and the colony. And so they are extremely hard workers and accomplish a ton in the moments that make up today. Whereas you look at a sea turtles can live longer than humans. And oftentimes they're on these very large and long migration patterns where they're having to travel thousands of miles away. And if you think about a tortoise, they're very slow, but they're very deliberate in what they do. And they're looking at really the long-term objective of what they're trying to accomplish. And so to me, it's marrying these two things together where you learn in your life when it comes to your long-term aspirations, how do you set up your short-term actions to be like the bee and allow your aspirations to be like the turtle and create deliberate action where you're tracking against your ambitions and knocking those off over time so that they accumulate into your long-term aspirations. And that's what this chapter is all about. And it really exposes through the lens of Elon Musk and what he's done at SpaceX and some of his other companies of how he has really perfected this long-term aspiration, which he has is of saving humanity from itself, with the near-term ambitions that he has, which is um, completely overhauling space travel, finding ways that we can bore under Earth, like we're going to need to do on planets where we're not going to have the ability to live above the Earth because of how hazardous they are to human life, to needing an energy source where batteries and solar power comes into play, etc. So you think sometimes that Elon Musk is a madman by all these things that he's pouring his efforts in, but they're really, if you look at it, they're ambitions that he knows has to get done to fulfill the longer aspiration of getting people to another interplanetary place in the future. And then he breaks this all down into short increments of time where he's taking deliberate actions that lead him closer to fulfilling the ambitions that he has, which then get him closer to fulfilling his ultimate aspiration. And so that's what this whole chapter is about.
And then after that, so we all have plans, we all have goals, we can kind of cut them up into pieces and work on them bit by bit throughout the day, but we're working towards a larger goal. So the daily task and the daily goals are the bee, the larger goal is the turtle. What is the pain in the ass mosquito in this analogy of animals and insects? Um, or reptiles and insects? How does how do we disrupt our own lives? And what is disruption and distraction?
This really fits into the whole passion struck frameworks. The bee and turtle effect is really something that allows you to put all of the principles into practice. The mosquito auditor, what you're talking about with the pain in the ass, is really the third principle that I lay out in the book. And these don't necessarily have to have an order, but there is a natural progression that they fall into. So we talked about becoming a mission angler, which is you want to recraft the life that you want to become your ideal self. Well, the first thing that you're going to have to do in order to do that, once you figure out what it is you want to do, is you're likely going to have to reinvent yourself because you're probably, like I was, a completely different version of the person that you ultimately want to become. Well, as you are starting to show yourself differently and a different and hopefully improved version of yourself is interacting with the world around you, the first place that you're going to feel resistance is in the people who are around you. Give me 1 second. So as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about just as we are all exposed to toxins, whether it's in the air we breathe or in the foods we ingest, we also have toxins in the environments that surround us. And the biggest toxins tend to be the people who infiltrate our inner circle. And so I was looking for a great metaphor to express this. And I happened to be on one of these walks thinking about how to approach this chapter when after I was meditating and kind of knew what I wanted to cover in it, which was invisible influences, I happened to turn on a radio show, talk show, and they were talking about what is the most dangerous animal on the planet. And I think, like all the listeners, I was thinking it's some type of snake or the deadly jellyfish that they have in Australia or a shark or something like that. And the announcer said, all of you are wrong. The most dangerous animal on the planet by far and wide is the mosquito. Kills over 1 million people per year. Yet we think of it as such a non-threat in our lives. And it's typically because they're all around us. Oftentimes they're a nuisance that we're just swatting away, or by the time they strike us, we don't even feel their invisible presence. And the same thing, as I started thinking about it, are like the invisible influences that we have in our human lives, where we have human mosquitoes who are like these mosquitoes. They become human mosquitoes who are invisibly showing up in our lives, ultimately because many of them have been there for so long. It could be our parents, aunts, uncles, siblings, friends, coworkers. But I tried to give 3 different categories that people could identify with. One is the bloodsucker, another is the invisible suffocator, and the third one is the pain in the ass. And the bloodsucker you can think of as that person in your life who is in all for themselves, and they're going to do whatever it takes to extract the last pound of flesh from you to get to where they want or need in life. The invisible suffocator are those pessimists in your life, the glass half empty or half full type of people who you've got this great opportunity to pursue, and all they can do is give you the negativity about what it's going to amount to in your life. And then the pain in the ass are those people that gossip behind your back. They're the ones who are talking bad about you, who are telling people you'll never amount to anything, who sabotage different aspects of who you are, or think that they're the most important person in the world and all your energy should be focused on them, yet they give nothing back to you. So those are 3 that I talk about in this chapter. And the beauty of this is once you know that they're present, and a great way to do this is to just think of an archery target and put 5 of your closest friends in the bullseye, and do any of them fall into the bloodsucker, invisible suffocator, PETA camp? And if they do, it's a great thing because now you've diagnosed who they are in your life, and you can put up boundaries to keep them at arm's length.
When you're pursuing your passion, it becomes a very lonely venture. You can't pursue your passion with other people, I don't think. It's a very individualistic pathway because it's different for everybody. Everybody has different passions. Even if 2 people like writing, their styles of writing, what they like about writing are very different. How do you deal with the loneliness when it comes to pursuing your passion, having no one understand why you're pursuing it, what you're doing, having everybody doubt you, try to talk sense into you, and I use quotes on that because it makes sense to them, it doesn't make sense to you. And how do you continue to have faith in yourself that you're on the right track when maybe the results are not as immediate as you might want them to be?
Yeah, so this is another principle I talk about in the book, and it's really along the saying that sometimes being right means being alone. Meaning, I have found so many times throughout my life and my professional career that I have had periods where I am all alone because I am adhering to the core values that matter the most to me. And when I do that, it sometimes puts me at odds with others who don't have those same stringent core values. And that's one aspect of when it means being right. You might have to make difficult decisions that have repercussions because you're being true to yourself. Being right by being alone also resembles Steve Jobs, who I wrote about in this chapter, about having a vision that you believe so strongly in that you can project in your mind and see coming to actuality that many people cannot see themselves. And I have seen this play out so many times in my professional career where I have this unique capability where I could see things 5, 10 years out. And so as I was building capabilities in the different endeavors I was going down, I was always doing it with this long-term perspective that we talked about, like the tortoise, where I could see what this could become in the future. What I found is the vast majority of people have a hard time seeing beyond a couple months in front of them. And so I learned that I had to really boil this down into near term things that people could see and oftentimes not share the longer term perspective. But it has repercussions if you're trying to create something like Steve Jobs was doing with Apple, where he saw what this end product could be, and other people are around him looking at the short term aspects of success and not looking at the long term things. And in his case, it caused him to get fired from his own company. But ultimately, he had that conviction to stand by his values, stand by what he thought was right, and use this to ultimately have, enormous success in his life. But there are times where metaphorically or even in real life, that if you're on this path of becoming passion struck, you are going to find yourself alone because you are going to be at times filled with so much conviction about what you're doing that people are going to tell you you're wrong. I mean, I can't tell you how many people told me it was futile to start a podcast or to write a book or to even do passion struck. But if you truly believe in what you're trying to accomplish, who you're trying to serve, you can't let these mosquitoes stop you from the mission that you've been called to undertake. And so you are going to find yourself at points in your life where sometimes being right means you're going to have to make choices that are completely away from being with the crowd or the herd.
Well, when dealing with mosquitoes, just order a mosquito swatter from Amazon and it solves everything. Um, One thing about passion and conviction, rather, is love. You have to love what you're doing. And so, if I may take a page out of Lex Friedman's book, not that he's written a book, but he's done enough podcasts to, write 50. But anyway, what does love have to do with passion? How do you continue to be in love with what you're doing? Um, how do you maintain that? And does it only exist in passion or does it kind of spill out to other areas?
I think of it as self love. And I think of it in a way like Mark Twain said that 20 years from now, you're going to be more disappointed by the things that you didn't do than by the ones you did do. And to me, having the confidence to do those things starts and ends with loving yourself and believing in yourself enough that you can do them. And I think something I would like to leave people with is whether you look at the works of author Bronnie Ware, who studied the 5 regrets of the dying, or you look at research that's come out of psychologist Tim Gilovich at Cornell University, both revealed a profound truth. When you ask people who are in their third quadrant of their life what their biggest life regret is, a staggering 76% of people cite that it's not fulfilling their ideal self. And it highlights that our deepest regrets are tied not to mistakes we've made, but to the what ifs and should haves, the echoes of our ideal selves that we never pursued. And to me, what typically gets in the way of that is the person who we stare at in the mirror every day. because we start doubting ourselves. We start expecting we start putting limitations over what we think we can accomplish. And I think the deeper we get into self-awareness, the deeper we probe ourselves and realize that we are the greatest person on earth that we are ever going to meet, because no one has the gifts that we ourselves were given. And we double down on that self-love. It gives you the confidence to then live your life differently. And so that's how I would look at love.
And speaking of love, I guess intergenerational love, and I don't mean that in a weird way, but how can Gen Z best learn from older generations? And how can older generations best learn from Gen Z? I feel like there's a lot of things that Gen Z need to learn, but that they feel for some reason that older generations cannot provide them for whatever reason. And there are a lot of things that older generations can learn from Gen Z, but, and again, for some reason, older generations just think that Gen Z are immature and amateur and don't really understand how the world works, and so they just need to shut up and listen. I think both of those things, I think both perspectives hold water, but I don't think that they are the correct perspectives. So, from your experience, how do you impart wisdom onto youth, and how do you learn from youth?
I mean, it really symbolizes a forward focused belief in life. And that's what Passion Struck really teaches the readers to do, is to direct their gaze ahead towards their goals and aspirations rather than dwelling on past mistakes and missed opportunities. That said, I think that history repeats itself, and there's a ton of history that people of any generation can study of mistakes that we have made as humans over time that you can learn from and not repeat. And I think that as I've gotten older, and I know my parents probably felt the same way when they were trying to guide me, it's the mistakes that I have made in life that I hope my kids don't repeat, which are the ones that I am trying to teach them to avoid. But sometimes what I have found is that the only way people can learn themselves is by making the same mistakes. So I think you've got to look in the past enough to understand some of the big mistakes that have been made over and over again and to try to avoid them. But I also think it's not beating yourself up when you do make mistakes and not dwelling on them and continuing to drive forward, and to realize that life is going to throw events at you like they did with the FBI with me, like they did with Enron with me, other things in my life where, yeah, it's going to be crappy and it's not going to feel good in the moment, but I guarantee you come out much stronger from that, and it's going to propel you forward in the future. Now, as far as learning from those younger than us, I think Thunberg is a great example of how we can learn from another person's conviction. I mean, have people villainized her? Yes. Have people tried to put down her activism? Yes. But if she hadn't taken the active stance that she has, many of the greatest programs we have that are coming online for climate change probably in retrospect wouldn't have happened because of one use conviction to do something different. So I've learned a lot by the current generation of how much they're willing to stick up for things that they believe, and how uniting a force that can be for them not wanting to adhere to common things that or norms that may have existed for a period of time that need to be broken down. And one of the biggest areas that exist in is in the diversity of how people live their lives and their thoughts. So I think there's a lot we can learn from this generation into how They're trying to forcefully push back on things that they don't think are norms that need to continue to exist in the world.
And final question. This is the Gen Z Diplomat podcast. You've talked at length in such detail, so thank you for that. I just want to say that, this is the second time we recorded because the first recording kind of malfunctioned, let's say. So, there's a lot of love and appreciation for folks like yourself who are so, I don't mean this ironically, but passionate about what they are saying and what they've done. And their entire goal is to just give back to those that can make something out of themselves. And I think Gen Z desperately, desperately need everything that you are teaching. So, last question, what advice do you have specifically for Gen Z who maybe are confused but hopefully optimistic about the future?
To 10x your life, you need to become a level 10 person who creates the life that you want. And we overcomplicate this. The thing that you need to figure out in your life is how do you reduce the activation energy to get over the hurdles that come in front of you in your life. And a great way to think of activation energy is imagine you're looking at two axes, and on one is energy, on the other is intentional action. And let's think you've got a stick figure who's trying to push a boulder over a hill. That period of time where that ball reaches its aspect and starts going down the downhill is when you can think of lowering your activation energy. So the only way you 10x your life is by taking intentional action and learning the importance of micro choices, and that your choices are ultimately what determines whether you're going to find yourself in a tsunami of greatness or a waterfall of despair. The only way that you're going to 10x the life that you want is to start approaching your health, happiness, relationships, spirituality, financial security intentionally, and to lessen that activation energy that it takes for you to take continual action against broadening the depth of who you're trying to become. And to me, that is the secret. It's all comes down to intentional action and training yourself to make choices that lead you closer to that 10x life that you want and not further away. And it begins and ends with starting to act like the person you want to become in the future, and then making choices to start emulating that person.
John Miles, thank you so much for this conversation. Where can we find your book and where can we find you online?
Yeah, the best two places to find me are my two websites, either John, middle initial R, miles.com, or passionstruck, STRUCK.com. And on all the social platforms, I'm at John R. Miles, and I post daily.
Fantastic. Everybody should check you out and read the book. It is very accessible, very detailed, and very well written. Um, I'll rip through it once again after we get off this podcast. But thank you so much for this conversation. It was an absolute pleasure interviewing you.